The house was bathed in soft, golden light, the smell of cinnamon and pine filling the air. The tree stood proudly in the corner of the living room, its ornaments glinting in the glow of twinkling lights. The fireplace crackled gently, casting a comforting warmth over the room. I stood by the kitchen counter, swirling a glass of wine in my hand as I watched Emily finish wrapping the last of the gifts. She hummed along to the Christmas carols playing on the radio, her movements graceful and deliberate. She was beautiful, always had been, but tonight there was something different about her. A tension in her shoulders, a distracted look in her eyes. "Need any help?" I asked, taking a sip of my wine. She looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten I was there. "Oh, no, I'm good. Just finishing up this one for Claire," she said, holding up the brightly wrapped package. Our daughter, Claire, was upstairs, fast asleep in her new Christmas pajamas. It was our first Christmas in the new house, and I'd gone all out to make it special, decorating the tree together, baking cookies, even stringing lights across the roof despite my fear of heights. Emily had seemed happy, or at least content, but there had been moments when her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting my glass down and crossing the room to sit beside her. "Yeah, of course," she said quickly, her tone light. "Too light. Just a lot to do, you know how it is." I nodded, though something in her voice didn't sit right with me. Emily was always busy, always juggling a million things, but she rarely let it show. Lately, though, there had been a distance between us, a gap I couldn't quite bridge no matter how hard I tried. As she finished wrapping the gift, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She reached for it quickly, almost reflexively, and tilted the screen away as she read the message. A small, private smile flickered across her face before she set the phone back down. "Who's that?" I asked casually, though my heart had begun to pound. "Just Megan," she said, naming her coworker without hesitation. "We were talking earlier about the secret Santa at work." I nodded, trying to push the unease from my mind. But that smile lingered in my thoughts, nagging at me like a loose thread begging to be pulled. By the time we climbed into bed, the unease had settled into a knot in my stomach. Emily was already lying on her side, scrolling through her phone with that faint smile I couldn't stop thinking about. I slipped under the covers beside her, my mind racing. "Long day, huh?" I said, breaking the silence. "Yeah," she murmured, not looking up from her phone. I stared at the ceiling, the crackling of the fireplace downstairs now replaced by the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Minutes passed, but sleep felt impossible. Every time her phone buzzed, my chest tightened. I told myself I was overreacting. Emily had never given me a reason to doubt her before. But something about tonight felt off. When she finally put her phone on the nightstand and turned off the lamp, I waited for her breathing to even out before I moved. Sliding out of bed as quietly as I could, I grabbed her phone. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, but tonight, the nagging suspicion was too much to ignore. The lock screen greeted me with no barriers. She hadn't bothered to set a passcode. A small part of me felt guilty as I opened her messages, but that guilt evaporated the moment I saw the name. Matt. My stomach dropped. Matt was no coworker, no family friend. He was someone she'd mentioned in passing months ago, an old acquaintance she'd reconnected with at a company dinner. I scrolled through their texts, my hands trembling. Matt, Merry Christmas Eve. Wish I could see you tonight. Emily, me too. I can't stop thinking about last night. My throat tightened as I kept scrolling. Their messages painted a picture I didn't want to see. Late-night meetups. Inside jokes. Compliments heaped on her in ways I hadn't in years. My mind reeled as the pieces began to click into place. The late nights at work. The sudden gym membership. The way she'd been distant, yet still so effortlessly charming around me. It wasn't just flirting. There was a connection here, one that she'd chosen to pursue while I was busy planning our perfect Christmas. A photo attachment caught my eye, and I hesitated before opening it. When I did, my worst fears were confirmed. It was a picture of them together, his arm around her waist as they stood in what looked like a dimly lit bar. Her smile was wide and genuine, her body leaning into his like they belonged together. I backed out of the app, my chest heaving. The air in the room felt suffocating, and the warmth of the house now seemed like a cruel mockery of the icy storm raging inside me. Setting her phone back on the nightstand, I stumbled downstairs, needing space, needing air. The Christmas tree lights twinkled in the darkened living room, but the sight of them brought no comfort. I sat on the couch, burying my face in my hands as the weight of her betrayal pressed down on me. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? And the most painful question of all, why wasn't I enough? I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the tree and letting my thoughts spiral. The glow of the lights felt distant, unreal, as if I were watching someone else's Christmas unfold. Outside, the snow fell in soft, silent flurries, blanketing the world in a calm I couldn't feel. Eventually, I heard footsteps on the stairs. My body tensed instinctively as Emily appeared at the edge of the living room, her silhouette framed by the faint light of the tree. She had a robe wrapped around her, and her expression was a mix of confusion and concern. "Michael? What are you doing down here?" she asked, her voice soft. For a moment, I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind raced with everything I wanted to say, every accusation I wanted to throw at her. But when I finally spoke, my voice was quieter than I expected. "I couldn't sleep," I said simply. She stepped closer, her brow furrowed. "Is something wrong? You seem off." Her words sent a surge of anger through me. I stood abruptly, the sudden movement making her flinch. "Yeah, Emily. Something is wrong." Her eyes widened slightly, and she took a step back. "What do you mean?" I ran a hand through my hair, pacing in front of the couch. "Do you think I'm stupid? That I wouldn't notice the way you've been acting lately? The late nights, the texts, the distance." Her face paled, and she folded her arms defensively. "Michael, what are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped, my voice rising. "I saw your texts, Emily. I know about Matt." Her reaction was immediate, her face crumpled, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of her guilt had finally become too much to carry. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You went through my phone. That's what you're upset about?" I barked, incredulous. "Not the fact that you're sneaking around with another man on Christmas Eve?" Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head. "Michael, it's not what you think." "Don't," I said, pointing at her. "Don't lie to me. I saw the messages, Emily. I saw the picture. How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, her hands trembling as she clutched the edges of her robe. "A few months," she admitted finally, her voice breaking. "But it's not serious." "Not serious?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You're exchanging 'I can't stop thinking about you' texts with someone who isn't your husband, meeting up with him in bars, and it's not serious?" Her tears spilled over, and she covered her face with her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. It felt good to be noticed again. To feel alive." Her words cut through me like a blade. "Alive?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "You think I don't notice you? That I don't love you? I've spent weeks trying to make this Christmas perfect for you and Claire, and this is how you repay me?" She dropped her hands, her face streaked with tears. "It wasn't about you, Michael. I wasn't trying to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "Because you did." The silence that followed was unbearable. She stood there, her sobs quieting as I turned away, my hands gripping the back of the couch for support. My mind raced with conflicting emotions, anger, hurt, betrayal, and, somewhere buried beneath it all, a flicker of desperation. Desperation to understand why. Why him? I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. What does he have that I don't? She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was soft, almost apologetic. It wasn't about him, she said. It was about me. About feeling wanted. About feeling like I mattered. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt something I hadn't expected, guilt. Had I made her feel invisible? Had I been so caught up in the day-to-day grind of work and family that I'd stopped appreciating her, stopped showing her how much she meant to me? But the guilt was fleeting, quickly replaced by anger. Whatever shortcomings I had, they didn't excuse what she'd done. They didn't justify the betrayal that had shattered our life. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice hollow. I need some air. Before she could respond, I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, the icy air biting at my face as I stepped into the silent night. The cold wrapped around me as I walked aimlessly through the snow-covered streets. The festive lights strung across rooftops and trees mocked me with their cheerfulness, their colors blurred by the tears I refused to let fall. My breath came in sharp, frosty puffs as I replayed Emily's words in my mind. It wasn't about you. It was about me. It wasn't enough to numb the ache in my chest. I wanted answers, real answers. I wanted her to explain how she could throw away everything we built, everything we were, for fleeting moments with someone else. But more than that, I wanted to stop caring. I wanted to hate her. And yet, as I trudged through the snow, my thoughts kept circling back to the same question: was this my fault? I thought about the past year, the late nights at the office, the way I'd retreat into my phone or TV instead of asking about her day. The times she'd suggested date nights, only for me to wave her off with, "I'm too tired," or, "maybe next week." I'd always told myself there was time, that she understood how much I loved her even if I didn't say it often enough. Had I been wrong? Had my silence created a void she felt the need to fill? The crunch of footsteps in the snow behind me snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned to see Emily standing a few feet away, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She looked fragile, smaller somehow, as if the weight of the night had drained her of all strength. "Michael," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Please come back inside. It's freezing out here." I wanted to ignore her, to keep walking and leave her standing there in the snow. But the sight of her shivering, her eyes red and puffy, tugged at something deep within me, a part of me that still cared, despite everything. "What do you want, Emily?" I asked, my tone sharp but not as harsh as before. "I want to talk," she said, stepping closer. "I want to explain." I let out a bitter laugh. "Explain what?" "That you were bored. That you needed someone to make you feel alive again." Her face crumpled, and she looked away, her shoulders shaking as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "And I hate myself for it. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." "Funny way of showing it," I muttered, turning away from her. "I'm serious," she said, her voice louder now, more desperate. "I know what I did was wrong, Michael. I know I betrayed you. But it wasn't because I don't love you. It was because I thought you didn't love me anymore." Her words stopped me in my tracks. Slowly, I turned to face her, my chest tightening. "You thought I didn't love you?" She nodded, her tears glistening in the soft glow of a nearby street lamp. "You were always so distant," she said. "So wrapped up in work, in everything else. I felt like I was invisible, like I didn't matter to you anymore. And then Matt came along, and he noticed me. He made me feel seen." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I stood there, torn between anger and an aching sadness. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to remind her that she'd had a choice. That she could have come to me, talked to me, instead of turning to someone else. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, wondered if she was right. Had I made her feel unloved? Had I pushed her into his arms without even realizing it? I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. "Do you want to fix this?" I asked, my voice low but steady. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "Yes," she said immediately. "More than anything." "Then we start with the truth," I said. "No more lies, no more excuses. I need to know everything, Emily. And I need to know that you're willing to fight for us. Because I can't do this alone." She nodded fervently, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. "I promise." For a moment, we stood there in the snow, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, I sighed and started walking back toward the house. Emily followed close behind, her footsteps soft and hesitant. As we stepped through the door, the warmth of the house enveloped us, but it didn't reach the cold in my chest. There was a long road ahead of us, and I wasn't sure if we'd make it to the other side. But for now, I was willing to take the first step. We sat in the living room, the glow of the Christmas tree casting soft, uneven light across Emily's face. She perched on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while I leaned back in the armchair, gripping the edges of the armrests like they were the only thing holding me upright. "Start from the beginning," I said, my voice flat but firm. "I want to know everything." She nodded, her throat bobbing as she swallowed. "It started 3 months ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "At that dinner I told you about, the one with my coworkers." I clenched my jaw but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "Matt was there. He's an old friend from college, we used to work on the school paper together. I hadn't seen him in years, and we just started talking. It felt easy, you know. Familiar." "Familiar," I repeated, the word leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. She flinched but pressed on. "At first, it was just catching up. Swapping stories about work, sharing memories from college. But then he started texting me." "And you didn't think to mention this to me?" I asked, my voice sharp. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her hands. "I didn't think it was a big deal at first. But then the texts got more personal. He'd compliment me, tell me I was beautiful, ask about things that had nothing to do with work. I knew I should have told him to stop, but I didn't. It felt good." Her admission hit me like a blow. "Good," I said, my tone laced with disbelief. "It felt good to let another man flirt with you?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for it to go that far, Michael. I swear. But I was feeling so invisible. And Matt, he saw me." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging between us. I wanted to yell, to throw something, to tell her how much she'd hurt me. But instead, I asked the question I was most afraid of. "Did you sleep with him?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "I swear to you, it never got physical. We met up a few times, at coffee shops, once at a bar, but that was it. I couldn't cross that line." I studied her face, searching for any hint of deceit. She held my gaze, her eyes red and swollen but unwavering. A part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that our marriage hadn't been completely destroyed. But another part, the part that had seen those texts and that picture, couldn't let go of the doubt. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" I asked finally, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me how you were feeling instead of turning to him?" She let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling in her lap. "Because I was scared," she admitted. "I didn't think you'd care. You've been so distant lately, Michael. Like your mind is always somewhere else. And I thought if I told you, it wouldn't change anything. Her words cut deeper than I expected. Had I really been that distant? So wrapped up in work, in providing for our family, that I'd stopped seeing her. Guilt and anger churned inside me, fighting for dominance. I'm not excusing what I did, she said quickly, as if sensing my thoughts. I know it was wrong, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But please, Michael, believe me when I say I never stopped loving you. Loving me, I repeated, shaking my head. How can you say that when you were sneaking around with someone else? Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't look away. Because it's the truth, she said, her voice trembling. I made a mistake, a horrible, selfish mistake, but I never stopped loving you. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to prove that to you if you'll let me. Her words hung in the air, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, but for the first time that night, it felt less like a wall and more like a bridge, a fragile, unsteady bridge that might lead us back to each other if we were willing to take the risk. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally, my voice raw. Not yet. She nodded, her tears falling freely. I understand, she whispered. But I'm not giving up on us, Michael. I can't. Her determination surprised me, and a part of me, small but not insignificant, felt the first stirrings of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But it wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick. I don't know what happens next, I said, my hands gripping the armrests of the chair. But if we're going to try, it starts with honesty. Complete honesty. No more secrets. She nodded again, her gaze steady despite the tears. No more secrets, she promised. For the first time that night, I believed her. The next morning was unbearably quiet. The warmth and magic of Christmas morning had been replaced by a heavy stillness that neither of us seemed to know how to break. Claire's excited footsteps echoed down the hall, and for her sake, we had to pull ourselves together. "Merry Christmas," she exclaimed as she bounded into the living room, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the gifts under the tree. Emily and I exchanged a quick, silent glance, an unspoken truce for the day. We couldn't let Claire feel the weight of what had happened. Not today. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile as I scooped her into a hug. Emily knelt beside us, brushing a strand of Claire's hair out of her face and pressing a kiss to her forehead. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Almost. We spent the morning opening gifts, Claire's laughter filling the room as she tore through wrapping paper and held up each new toy with giddy delight. I tried to focus on her joy, on the way her face lit up with each surprise, but the tension between Emily and me hung heavy in the air. Every time our eyes met, it was a painful reminder of the conversation waiting for us once the day was over. That night, after Claire had finally gone to bed, Emily and I found ourselves back in the living room, the glow of the Christmas tree casting shadows on the walls. She sat on the couch, clutching a mug of tea, while I stood by the fireplace, staring at the flames as if they held the answers I couldn't find. "I know today was hard," she said softly, breaking the silence. I turned to face her, crossing my arms. "Hard doesn't even begin to cover it." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the mug in her hands. "I'm sorry, Michael. For all of it. For ruining Christmas, for hurting you, for—" her voice trailed off, and she let out a shaky breath. "For everything." Her apology felt genuine, but it didn't ease the ache in my chest. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said, my tone flat but honest. "I don't even know if I can." She looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I understand," she said quietly. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I want to fix this. I want to fix us." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. But it was fragile, tenuous, like a candle flame that could be snuffed out with the slightest breeze. "Fixing this isn't going to be easy," I said finally. "It's not going to happen with a few apologies and promises. It's going to take time and effort. From both of us." "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I'll go to therapy. I'll answer any question you have, no matter how painful. I'll do anything, Michael. I can't lose you." Her desperation was raw, unfiltered, and it tugged at something deep inside me. I didn't know if I could forgive her, but I knew I wasn't ready to walk away. "Not yet." "Okay," I said finally, my voice soft. "We'll try. But it's going to be on my terms. And if I feel like you're not being honest, or if you can't prove to me that you're committed to this, it's over. Do you understand?" She nodded quickly, her hands trembling as she set the mug down and leaned forward. "I understand. I promise, Michael. No more lies." I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. The road ahead felt daunting, but for the first time, it felt like we might have a chance. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. The days following Christmas were a delicate balancing act, each one filled with cautious steps and quiet reflection. Emily and I moved through the house like strangers learning to coexist, careful not to push too hard or say the wrong thing. It was far from perfect, but it was a start. Therapy was the first real step forward. We found a couples counselor, neutral ground where we could lay everything bare. The first session was excruciating. Emily recounted her feelings of invisibility and loneliness, while I faced the hard truth of how my inattention had contributed to the cracks in our marriage. "I thought I was doing enough just by being here," I admitted during one session. "But I wasn't really present. I was so focused on providing, on routines, that I stopped seeing her." Emily reached for my hand, her touch hesitant but sincere. "And I should have told you how I felt instead of pulling away," she said, her voice trembling. "I let myself believe it was too late, and I made the worst mistake of my life." Our therapist nodded, her calm gaze moving between us. "The fact that you're both here, acknowledging your roles in what happened, is a good sign. Rebuilding trust takes time, but it starts with communication and consistency." At home, we began working on the little things we hadn't done in years. Cooking dinner together instead of eating in silence. Sitting on the couch to talk after Claire went to bed instead of retreating to separate corners of the house. Emily made a point to share her thoughts and feelings openly, and I forced myself to truly listen, even when the conversations were hard. One evening, I found her in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred a pot of soup. The sight of her, the way her hair caught the light, the way her hands moved with practiced ease, brought back memories of the woman I'd fallen in love with. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. "Smells good," I said, stepping into the kitchen. She looked up, startled, then smiled. It was small, tentative, but it reached her eyes. "Thanks. It's your favorite." I hesitated, then crossed the room to stand beside her. "Emily," I said quietly, "I need to know, why didn't you stop when you knew it was wrong? Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Her shoulders sagged, and she set the spoon down, turning to face me. "Because I was scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared that if I told you how I felt, it wouldn't matter. That nothing would change." Her honesty stung, but it also felt like a step toward healing. "I wish you'd trusted me enough to try," I said, my voice heavy with regret. "I wish I had too," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "But I'm here now, Michael. I'm trying now. And I'm not going to stop." One night, as we sat together on the couch, Emily handed me a small, wrapped box. I looked at her, surprised. "What's this?" "Just open it," she said, her voice soft. Inside was a simple photo frame, holding a picture of us from years ago. It was from one of our early Christmases together, before Claire, before the house, before the weight of life had settled on our shoulders. We were smiling, carefree, our arms wrapped around each other. I found it when I was cleaning out the attic, she said, her voice trembling. I thought maybe we could use a reminder of who we were. Of what we had. I stared at the photo, my chest tightening. Do you think we can find that again? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She reached for my hand, her grip firm despite the tears streaming down her face. I think we can find something even better. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it felt like a beginning, a fragile, tentative beginning. And as I sat there beside her, holding the photo of a life we'd almost lost, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we still had a chance.